Hey everyone, it's Tox from CritsHappen.com. Thanks for watching and welcome back. We're here with another Critical Strike review where we take 3 games, put them under the microscope in a short 5-minute or so review and give them a crit, a hit, or a miss rating. As always, crits are top of the line and something we would recommend to almost everyone. Hits are very good, very well designed, and will probably fit for most playgroups. And misses just kind of miss the mark with us, but could be good depending on the theme, your likes and dislikes. As always, your mileage may vary. But let's take a look at what we're going to look at today. We actually have 3 very different games. One is a deck builder, one is a cube pusher, and one is a card thrower. We're going to take a look from Cryptozoic Entertainment at the Lord of the Rings deck building game, The Two Towers, which is the sequel to the Fellowship of the Ring deck building game that came out last year. This has a lot of the same stuff where you can intermix sets together, so we'll talk about that. And we'll also take a look at the wall and some of the more interesting concepts that are put into this version. Then we're going to jump into our biohazard suits and we're going to try and save the world with the expansion to Pandemic called In the Lab. And then finally, we are going to throw down as hard as we can with as many cards as possible in AEG's Maximum Throwdown. This episode of Critical Strikes is sponsored in part by Wonko's Toys and Games in Austin, Texas. Check them out online at wonkos.com for all your collectible toy and tabletop gaming needs. So first up is the Lord of the Rings The Two Towers deck building game. Now, this game looks very familiar because it has the same style, same card types, same almost everything as the original Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Ring deck building game. As with before, there are a series of heroes that you can choose that will each start the game with a specific card in their deck. Now, as you see in this case, every single person has a maneuver, which is the orange bordered cards. The promo card is Eowyn, and you can get her with a pre-order where she comes with a card called I Fear Neither Death Nor Pain. It says name a non-starter card type and then draw the top card of your deck. If it's the name type, you get +1 power. Now, most of you may think that's not very good because at the beginning of the game, you're going to have nothing but starter cards. Well, that actually comes in very, very handy down the road, depending on how you're going to build your deck. To start off with, you're going to start the game with 6 courage, 3 despair. The courages provide you +1 power, the despairs provide you nothing but despair, and then your hero's special card. You're going to shuffle up, and that is going to be the beginning of your deck to deal with the path. The path is this center deck of cards which consists of artifacts, enemies, allies, fortunes, locations, and other maneuvers. Your job is going to be to purchase them using power. The power cost is in the lower right-hand corner. And as you build up your deck, you're going to gain power to defeat enemies or arch enemies, which is this stack right here. Now this starts off with Corrupted King Theoden. He's corrupt at the beginning of the Two Towers. It's your job to uncorrupt him and save him. He costs 8 power, just like the original hero from the Fellowship of the Ring. And as you can imagine, the villains get bigger, better, and badder as you go along. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, what's different? What's better? What's worse? How does this change? Well, first is the wall. If anyone is familiar with Lord of the Rings story and the movies, there is the wall at Helm's Deep, which is the epic battle inside of the Two Towers story and inside of the Two Towers movie. In this game, there is a separate deck of cards that represent Helm's Deep and that wall. And it is going to be scaled on the number of cards based on the number of players that are going to be in the game. And one of the cards is going to have a card called Breached. And once that is breached, that means the enemy forces are through it and very, very bad things are going to continue to happen. In fact, in most cases, the things that come out of that wall deck are very, very bad. Now, how do you get them? Very simple. There's going to be cards that you'll acquire throughout the game, either having an in-play effect when they get flipped over into the path, or when you play them, that is going to force you to draw a certain number of wall cards. So it adds a little bit of more like an aura or an enchantment type effect to the game that could affect you or all of the players. And then additionally, there is an extra card called the One Ring. The One Ring actually stays next to the path, and at different points throughout the game can be acquired and used as a defense or a card to get you more power. If you use it as a defense, it goes back to the center of the table, and someone else could then acquire it using a card that they have in their hand as well. As with the original Fellowship of the Ring, there is also this deck, which is the Impossible mode, and these guys have gotten even harder. I personally only like playing this game with Impossible mode because it's so much more challenging. But I'm a glutton for punishment, and quite honestly, this game has ratcheted things up. It is a little more difficult on the first couple of plays because you're learning a lot of the new cards and a lot of the new abilities. The other thing too is if you thought that the Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Ring was too easy because of its one power resource, this one is going to give you options that you haven't even thought about yet. There's cards that will give you many different abilities that says do this or do that, which gives you a lot of flexibility in your deck. However, one of the things that I have personally found is that while this adds some nice new elements to the game between the One Ring and the wall deck, the cards themselves are very, very hard to string together for multiply big combos. The first game we actually played of this, my deck was gigantic. It was like this thick. It was like 78 or 80 cards. And in a deck building game, that's just absolutely huge. The more we played it, the more we realized that we liked it better intermingled with the original set. However, this is not a game that you want to just take and shuffle together. There are actually specific rules in the back of the rule book that are going to show you what cards would be good to put together with the original set. And they are not kidding when they tell you, listen very closely. You'll see here there's some text that shows combining with the Fellowship of the Ring with the two towers, how many allies, how many enemies, how many artifacts. We made a really big mistake the first time that we played this game in terms of mixing the two together. Now, as you can imagine, there are nice little symbols on the cards to make sure you can separate the two afterwards. But in the end, this as a standalone game did not strike me as something amazing. But combining it with the original Fellowship of the Ring made it very, very enjoyable. It did make it a little painstaking because you have to kind of separate things in a certain fashion, but it was something that I still enjoyed very much. So while the last Lord of the Rings deck building game got a crit from us, this one is going to get a hit. I would highly suggest it for anyone who has the Fellowship of the Ring. However, anyone looking to jump on, I would probably recommend the Fellowship of the Ring first and then move into the Two Towers. Overall, a very fun game, again with the same artwork from the movie and that same type of style. Some nice new things thrown in from the wall and the One Ring, and extremely, extremely challenging guys in the Impossible mode, and something that will give you options intermingling it with the original set. Next up, we have Pandemic in the Lab from Z-Man Games. Now, Pandemic is an extremely popular, widely well-known game among the hobby enthusiasts and board gamers all over the world. Matt Leacock has done a tremendous job with that along with Tom Lehman, and the game is beloved by many. In fact, just came out on the iPad on iOS and has been really, really well received. Well, this is an expansion to the original Pandemic board game that, in my opinion, isn't really an expansion. In my opinion, this is Pandemic. So the idea of Pandemic, if by chance you're unfamiliar, is there is an outbreak in the world of several different diseases, and it's your job, along with other specialists, to go and cure those diseases. Now, the diseases are spreading throughout the world in different cities, and things are going to get out of hand with outbreaks, and it's up to you to race against the clock in a cooperative fashion to win the game. In the Lab has a whole new experience for you to play Pandemic. The original rules of Pandemic is you're collecting city cards and then discarding like color city cards to find cures. In the Lab, you're going to be actually sequencing diseases or sequencing cures for those diseases and doing, in my opinion, what really is the part of the game where you're actually curing these diseases. The original game always felt somewhat flat to me in the sense of you run around, you do all these actions, you take care of everything you need to take care of, and you only discard 5 cards to get the disease cured. In this game, you now have the option with the lab board to start to sequence diseases. What's going to happen is you're going to have cards that have multiple different colors or some that have all of the same color. And you're going to have these really cool little jars. Now, on this card you'll see is a blue jar, so you would put a blue jar to show that this is the blue disease. On this card you could choose either the red or the yellow. Let's go ahead and choose the red and put that up there. You'll notice on this sequence card there are 2 gray colored circles. Those can be filled by the color of the disease that you're trying to cure. So in this case red would be on there. Now how does this all work? Well, when you treat a disease, you would normally take a cube from the location that you're treating and put it back into the supply. In this case, you're going to get to choose to put it in one of the 2 dishes on the left. This is a nice inclusion of actually using the dishes for more than just storing your cubes. And as you can see from what we have laid out here, you can easily keep the cubes in the tops of the dishes while the bottoms of the dishes go in the lab. Now, as gameplay proceeds, you're going to have different types and different colors and different quantities of cubes all listed out in here. And as you'll notice, there's a lot of arrows on the board. And I think they made this a little more complex than they needed it to in terms of how the arrows move, but it works. Essentially, you can move all cubes of one of each colored cube from this dish to this dish. So if we were to move, let's say, everything from this dish to this dish, we have a red, a black, and a blue, we could do that, and one of each of them could go there. Any additionals, if we had, let's say, 2 blue in this dish, the blue would go back to the supply. Everything from this dish to this dish has all of one color. So we have 3 yellows and 2 blacks. We could take all 3 yellows and move them over for an action, and the 2 blacks would go back to the supply. Now, as you can imagine, things that are in here are affecting your supply. And as you know, if you run out of cubes to place onto the board when a disease occurs, you're going to lose the game. So part of this is managing your actions in the lab and your actions on the board. One other nice thing to note is while it takes an action to do everything in the lab that we're doing, you can take a free action in the lab whenever you build a new CDC area or a new building to treat things at. Now additionally, I could move everything from this to this, as you see with the arrows, and you'll notice that both going into this dish mean I can take one of each color and move them there. And again, from this dish I can move all of one color or all of one color up to here. Now I have the option, once I'm in this column, to then take things and put them onto our sequences or put them into the growth dish. The growth dish doubles everything that you put in there. So if we decided we wanted to put this red up into here, we would then take and double that and put 2 red and put these back into the supply. And then as you build this up and move these over, you could then put them onto the sequencing chart. Once you have filled up the sequencing chart and use a city of the cure's color to test the disease, you then only have to discard 3 cards of the same color city, not 5, to find a cure for the disease. This is tremendously, deeply thematic and is done so well, deceptively well. Most people, even myself, when starting to play this game, have felt the complexity of, oh my goodness, I need to take an action to do this, but I need to take an action on the regular board. Am I wasting my time in the lab when I could be actually just collecting cards on the regular board and trying to win the game that way? It feels so much more pressurized. But if you manage your lab actions well enough, you will actually start to realize that this is kind of removing the ability of collecting the 5 cards and streamlining your decisions to a much more effective way to cure the diseases, and a way that, in my opinion, totally cements the theme of Pandemic. It has been a joy getting my butt handed to me in this game. This is much more challenging and much more what I would call a thinking man's Pandemic than the original version of this. And I have thoroughly enjoyed this piece of the expansion of In the Lab. Now, in addition to just the in the lab capabilities, there is a team version or a team variant and a solo variant. The team variant, as you can imagine, would pit 2-on-2 or 2 versus 2 versus 2 in a 6-player game, and basically puts you against each other, still cooperatively working, but competitively trying to beat each other based on a score system. And then finally, it adds a very nice solo variant. The original solo variant had you taking 2 different roles. In this, there is actually a CDC card, and the CDC is going to take an action each turn in the solo game, allowing you to move a player, reassign roles, exchange data, draw a card, or discover a cure. So you're going to have a lot more options, and in my opinion, a little more organized of a solo game, the way that the CDC is used. There are, as always with Pandemic, new event cards. There are new role cards. We have the pilot, the field director, the local liaison, and the virologist. And then there are reprints of the researcher and the epidemiologist. Why are they reprinted? Because each of them have lab challenges on them. So the researcher and the epidemiologist, if you were using certain rules in the game, allow you to have additional abilities on them. And as always, they provide a nice in the lab symbol in the lower right of the cards, so you can easily separate them and put them back in. But an amazingly cool thing about this game is, even though this is the second expansion and the third of the new artwork for the Z-Man release of Pandemic, you can still fit everything in one box. It's tight. The lid sits up maybe about 1/4 of an inch to maybe an 1/8 of an inch if you have the scorecard in there from the On the Brink, but they've done a tremendous job with it. If you can't guess already, Pandemic in the Lab gets a crit. In my opinion, this is exactly what the original Pandemic should have been, but it has taken an already great game, made it even better in my opinion, and more thematic and more challenging without over-challenging you. I will let you know ahead of time. It is something that is going to press you on the very first few plays that you learn how to use the In the Lab, but stick with it and you will definitely enjoy In the Lab if you're a Pandemic fan. We're going to give it a crit from Crits Happen. We have absolutely enjoyed it. If there was any negative to this version of the expansion for this, is the team game. The team game fell a little flat for me. It's something some people may like to get the competitive juices going, but when I think about the cooperative versions of Pandemic and how well it brings people together working for a common goal, the whole team play just felt a little wonky, not quite connected to the thematics of what this game really does. So at the end of the day, Pandemic in the Lab gets a crit from Crits Happen. Last but not least is Maximum Throwdown. Maximum Throwdown is a pocket game from AEG. As you can see, it comes in a very small box, easy to carry around. This is designed to be a very light, very fun, and comically enjoyed game. It is designed around the mechanic of throwing cards. Now, most people will go, "Whoa, God, why do I want to do that?" Well, we all know the component drop. We all love the component drop, and some of us hate it and cringe. So if you don't like the concept of possibly beating your cards up, this may not be the game for you. But if you like a light-hearted, fun way to have a party-type game come out that's different, this may be right up your alley. So the designer Jason Tagmeyer has brought very fun and quirky rules together to make an enjoyable time using different characters from the AEG universe. There's people from Thunderstone, from Nightfall, from Smash Up, from Legends of the Five Rings, and there's locations from them as well. But how do you really play this game? Well, the first thing you're going to do is each person is either going to pick a deck or have one of these cards that has the turn orders on the back randomly dealt out to them, and that will be the deck that they will choose. Now, as you can imagine, there's different abilities on these cards that are going to impact the game when you throw them, and each deck is going to be better at some ability than another. Let's take a look at a two-player game and show you really quickly how it actually works. So for this, we're going to take Thunderstone versus Aliens from Smash Up and take a look at what happens. So here you see a possible setup for a two-player game of Maximum Throwdown. Each player has their cards 15 in total to make up their deck. And then there are 6 different locations that are placed out. A nice, really fun thing about Maximum Throwdown is you can use as many or as few of these locations as you want, and you can arrange them in any order you want on the table. There's designs you could make, there's specific patterns you could make, but the important thing is that cards cannot be in play unless they're touching these bases. So what's going to happen is there's 5 different phases to a turn. The first is to evaluate your active icons, but obviously on the first turn there's nothing on the board to evaluate. Then you would score points. However, there's nothing on the board to evaluate and score. Then you would attack and steal, but again there's nothing on the board. So you go immediately to phase 4 on the first turn, which is draw. You're going to naturally draw 1 card. If you had cards face up on the table that had the draw icon, you could potentially draw more. So let's say the aliens go first and they draw this card. Now, this has a lot of different symbols on it, but none of them are going to score us points, because the cards that are going to score us points are actually going to have pips on them like a die. When you're scoring, every 6 pips that are face up are going to give you 1 point. So this alien is going to take this 1 card, and then they must throw it onto the field. Now, you're not allowed to drop it over the field, and you can throw from any position, from anywhere you want. Be as creative as you want. You could play horse for all you want with this game. But as long as it touches a base like this one did, the card is active and it's in play. Now, all the different icons are very, very valuable. The plus symbol is a draw. So if that symbol stays uncovered by the beginning of the alien's next turn, he can draw an additional card. The throw symbol, which is the hand, allows them to throw an additional card or immediately rethrow a card that missed. So if I were to throw a card as an alien on my next turn and miss one of these bases or another card in play, then I could rethrow it. The break symbol, which is the kind of the shift or the crack, allows you to throw a card, miss completely touching any other card in play, and keep it in play to basically break the rules. The ninja mask, which is to steal, allows you to draw a card from an opponent's deck and throw it. And as you can imagine, this would allow you to throw it completely off the table, nowhere near any of these, or potentially throw it and land it face down. Now, why would I do that? Well, not only would I eliminate my opponent from having access to a card, but it could become part of the playing field where if one of my cards touch it, then I could still keep my card in play. The 6 bases are the original touch points in the game. From there, all you have to do is touch any other card to keep your cards in play. The swords are the attack symbol. Those allow you to discard a card from an opponent's deck altogether. And then finally there's the points, which look like dice faces, which we showed you already. So on the Thunderstone player's turn, he would then draw a card, and he has the throw icon, the draw icon, and 3 pips. So he would immediately try and toss it out there, and if that happens, it's perfectly legal. He threw it on the board, he moved one of the cards on the board already, but it is still touching one of the cards on the board. Then it would go over back to the alien side. And as you can imagine, with 6 players, it gets very crowded very quickly. What's going to happen is over time, people are going to throw cards out. And let's just go ahead and put a couple out for each player right now and take a look at what happens. Now, if this is the scenario at the beginning of the Thunderstone player's turn, he would gain 1 point during the evaluate and score. He would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pips showing face up, and he would get 1 point for that. However, if on the alien's turn they threw a card and covered up even partially one of the circles, they don't have to cover up the whole pip. Let's say this landed like this, just enough to cover up a portion of that circle. Those icons are inactive, and now, according to this board, the Thunderstone player only has 5 pips face up. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of looking down directly over the board and making sure you've got things covered or not covered. And there's a lot of fun to this game because it's a game that you're gonna laugh at. As beautiful as the artwork is on the back of the cards, and as serious as some of the themes are from the games that they've pulled from, this is a very crazy, wacky, wonky, fast-paced game. You're gonna continue until all players have played all of their cards. Now you may think to yourself, it's good to draw and it's good to throw as many as possible. However, someone could let another player do that, run through their deck, and if that happens, the other players still get to finish throwing their cards in their deck and taking turns. And more importantly, the turns continue to go around and people continue to score. So if somebody gets an advantage by another player losing all of their cards and having thrown them all, they could sit there and rack up points turn after turn after turn. So there is quite an actual good amount of strategy in this game, but it is more playing against the players than playing against the game. You have to understand what the players are around the table and what their play styles are like, what cards they have left possibly, and what they could do if they cover up your cards and you have none left to throw. Overall, Maximum Throwdown is fun, it's silly, it's something you could teach to a very young child. We have played with as young as 5, and we have played with as old as I could barely count to, and everyone has had a lot of fun. Now yes, you're throwing your cards, you're probably not going to sleeve these. Yes, they're going to get dinged up, but it's a very inexpensive price point to get in. I believe retail is either $9.95 or $14.95, something close to that, and it's going to provide you a very good amount of fun. It is not the most deeply strategic game you will play in 2013, but it is something that will provide a good amount of fun for most play groups. So at the end of the day, Maximum Throwdown gets a hit from Crits Happen. So that's it for another episode of Critical Strikes. From Cryptozoic Entertainment, the Lord of the Rings Two Towers deck building game gets a hit. From Z-Man Games, Pandemic in the Lab, the expansion, gets a gigantic crit. And from AEG, Maximum Throwdown gets a hit. We'd like to once again thank Wonkos, our sponsor, for providing us a copy of Pandemic in the Lab to review for you. If you're interested in that or any other game you've seen on Crits Happen, definitely feel free to reach out to them at wonkos.com. But until we see you next time, we hope you enjoy all of your deck building, cube pushing, disease curing, maximum throwdown card tossing times in all of these and your games. Thanks so much for watching, keep rolling those dice, and we hope they're all crits.